Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the third Fall Asleep with Sith. And this time, we'll delve into even more grim fairy tales. So, same as before, find a nice, comfortable position, put your phone to the side, and just relax. The story of Mr. Fix-It-Up. Fix-It-Up had been a soldier for a long time. When the war came to an end, however, and there was nothing but the same old things to do every day, he resigned from the army and decided to become a servant for a great lord. There would be clothes trimmed with gold, lots to do, and always new things happening. So he set out on his way and came to a foreign court, where he saw a lord taking a walk in the garden. Fix-It-Up did not hesitate. He moved briskly over to the lord and said, "Sir, I'm looking for employment with a great lord. If your majesty is himself such a person, it would give me great pleasure to serve you. There's nothing I don't know or can't do. I know just how to carry out orders, no matter how they're given."
"Fine, my son," the lord said. "I'd be pleased to have you. First tell me, what do I desire right now?"
Without answering, Fix-It-Up spun around, rushed away, and returned with a pipe and tobacco.
"Fine, my son. You are hired as my servant. But now I am going to command you to get Princess Nomini, the most beautiful maiden in the world. I want to have her for my wife."
"All right," said Fix-It-Up. "That's a trifle for me. Your majesty shall soon have her. Just give me a coach drawn by 6 horses, a coachman, guards, couriers, servants, a cook, all in full dress. I myself must have princely garments, and everyone must obey my commands." Soon they departed. Fix-It-Up, the servant, sat inside the coach, which headed straight towards the beautiful princess's court. When the road came to an end, they drove into a field, and soon reached the edge of a large forest, filled with thousands of birds. A boisterous song soared splendidly into the blue air.
"Stop, stop!" exclaimed Fix-It-Up. "Don't disturb the birds. They're praising their creator and will serve me some other time. Let's go to the left."
So the coachman had to turn and drive around the forest. Soon after, they came to a large field, where close to 1,000 million ravens were sitting and crying shrilly for food.
"Stop, stop!" exclaimed Fix-It-Up. "Untie one of the horses way up front. Lead it into the field and slaughter it, so the ravens can eat. I don't want them to suffer from hunger."
After the ravens had eaten, the journey continued. They came to a pond with a fish in it that was moaning and groaning.
"For God's sake, I have nothing to eat in this terrible swamp. Throw me into a running river, and I will repay your deed one day."
Before the fish could even finish speaking, Fix-It-Up had exclaimed, "Stop, stop! Cook, put the fish in your apron. Coachman, drive it to a running river." Fix-It-Up himself got out and threw the fish into the water, and the fish flapped its tail in joy. "Now, get the horses going," said Fix-It-Up. "We must arrive at the designated spot by evening." When he reached the royal residence, he drove straight into the best inn, where the innkeeper and all his people came out and welcomed him in their best manners, thinking that a foreign king had arrived, though it was only a servant. Fix-It-Up had himself announced at the royal court, where he endeavored to make a good impression and court the princess.
"My son," said the king, "many suitors have already been turned away because they couldn't perform the task I assigned them to win my daughter."
"All right," said Fix-It-Up. "Set any kind of task that you want me to do."
"I have ordered 1/4 of a liter of poppy seeds to be sown in a field. If you can gather them so that not one kernel is missing, you shall have the princess for your wife."
"Ho ho," Fix-It-Up thought. "That's not much for me." He then took a measuring cup, a sack, and snow-white sheets, and went out to the field, and spread the sheets next to the field where the seeds had been sown. Soon after, those birds who were singing that he left undisturbed in the forest arrived, and they picked up the seeds, kernel after kernel, and carried them to the white sheets. When the birds had picked them all up, Fix-It-Up poured them into the sack, took the measuring cup under his arm, and went to the king, and measured up the poppy seeds for him. Now he thought the princess was already his, but he was wrong.
"One more thing, my son," the king said. "My daughter has recently lost her golden ring. You may return it to me before you can have her."
Fix-It-Up didn't get upset. "Let your majesty show me the river and the bridge where the ring was lost. Then I shall soon return to you." When Fix-It-Up was brought there, he looked down, and there he saw the fish that he had thrown into the river. It stuck its head into the air and said,
"Wait a moment, I'll dive down. A whale has the ring underneath its fin. I'll fetch it."
Indeed, the fish soon returned and tossed the ring onto shore. Fix-It-Up brought it to the king, but the latter replied,
"Now, just one more thing. There's a unicorn in the forest. It's been causing a great deal of damage. If you were to kill it, there's nothing more you'll have to do."
Fix-It-Up didn't get very upset here either. Instead, he went straight into the forest, where he came across the ravens whom he had once fed.
"Just have a little more patience," they said. "The unicorn is lying down and sleeping, but it is not on the side where you can see its eye. When it turns over, we'll pick out its good eye. Then it will be blind and run furiously across trees and get itself stuck with its horn. Then you will be able to kill it easily."
Soon the beast tossed itself around a few times and laid on its other side. All at once the raven swooped down and pecked out its good eye. When it felt the pain, it jumped up and ran wildly around the forest. After it got its horn stuck in a thick oak tree, Fix-It-Up jumped out, cut off its head, and brought it to the king, who could no longer deny him his daughter. She was delivered to Fix-It-Up, who took a seat next to her in the coach. He was in full dress, just as he had come, and immediately drove off and brought the lovely princess to his lord. Fix-It-Up was given a fine reception, and the lord's wedding with the princess was celebrated in great splendor. Then Fix-It-Up was appointed prime minister. Everyone in the company to whom this tale was told wished to be at the celebration. One person wanted to be chambermaid, the other wardrobe attendant. Someone wanted to be a chamber servant, another the cook, and so on. The story of the white snake. Every day at noon, a covered dish was placed on the king's table. Then, after everyone left, the king would eat alone from the dish, and nobody in the entire realm knew what kind of food it was. One of the servants became curious and wanted to know what the dish contained. On one occasion, after the king had ordered him to take the dish away, he could no longer restrain himself. So he took the dish to his room and uncovered it. As he lifted the cover, he found a white snake lying inside, and once he laid his eyes on it, he felt a great desire to taste some of it himself. So he cut off a piece and began eating it. No sooner did his tongue touch the flesh of the snake that he understood the language of animals and heard what the birds in the windowsill were saying to each other. On this very same day, the queen lost one of her most beautiful rings, and the suspicion fell on him. The king also said that if he was not able to find a thief by morning, he himself would be punished as if he had been the guilty person. The servant became sad and went down into the courtyard, where some ducks were resting in the water. As he watched them, he heard one of them say,
There's something heavy in my stomach. I ate a ring that the queen lost.
The servant took the duck and carried it to the cook. "Kill this one. It's fat enough." So the cook cut off the duck's neck, and he began cleaning it. The queen's ring was indeed lying in its stomach. The servant brought it to the king, who was astonished and happy. Since he was sorry that he had treated the servant unjustly, he said,
"Demand whatever you like, whatever position of royal honor you would like."
However, the servant declined every offer, even though he was young and handsome. His heart was sad, and he did not want to remain at the court any longer. So he asked only for a horse and for money to travel and to see the world. Well, he was provided with everything in the very best way. The next morning he rode off and came to a pond where 3 fish were trapped in reeds and were wailing that they'd have to die if they couldn't come back into the water. So he dismounted, took them out of the reeds, and put them back in the water. Then the fish cried out,
We'll remember you, and one day we'll repay you.
He rode on, and while later he heard an ant king cry out,
Get away from us! You enormous beast is trampling us with his large hooves!
The young man looked down on the ground and saw his horse had stepped on an anthill. So he turned his horse away, and the ant king called out,
We'll remember you. One day we'll repay you.
Soon the servant entered a forest, where 2 ravens were throwing their young ones out of the nest. They said that their tiny ones were now big enough and could feed themselves. The young birds lay on the ground and screamed that they would die from starvation because their wings were too small, and they couldn't fly yet and search for food. So the young man dismounted, killed his horse with his sword, and threw the horse to the young ravens. They hopped over to the horse and ate their fill, and said,
We'll remember this, and one day we'll repay you.
The young man moved on and came to a large city, where he had heard a proclamation that whoever wanted to marry the king's daughter would have to perform a task given by her, and if he didn't complete it successfully, he would forfeit his life. Many princes had already been there and lost their lives, so there was nobody anymore who dared to try. This is why the princess had the proclamation issued again. The servant thought about it and decided to declare himself a suitor. So he was led out to sea, where a ring was thrown into it. He was to fetch it, and if he came out of the water without it, he'd be pushed back into the sea and would have to die in the water. As he was standing on the shore, the 3 fish that he had taken from the reeds and thrown into the water came swimming towards him. One of the fish held a shell in its mouth, and the ring was in the shell. The fish set it down on the beach at the feet of the young man, who was full of joy. So he brought the ring to the king and demanded the princess. However, when the princess heard that he wasn't a prince, she refused to accept him. Instead, she scattered 10 sacks full of millet seeds in the grass. He was to pick them all up before the sunrise the next day. Every grain was to be gathered, or else he'd lose his life. All at once the Ant King came out with all his ants, whom the young man had protected, and they picked up the millet seeds during the night and poured them into the sack. By morning they had finished the task. When the princess saw that the sacks had been filled, she was astonished, and the young man was brought before her. Since he was handsome, she liked him, but demanded that he perform a third task. He was to fetch an apple from the tree of life. As he stood there and thought about how he might get it, one of the ravens, whom he had fed with his horse, came and brought the apple in its beak. This is how he became the prince's husband, and when the father died, he became king of the entire country. The story of the journey of the straw, the coal, and the bean. A straw, a coal, and a bean came together and wanted to take a great journey. They had already gone through many countries when they reached a brook without a bridge and couldn't cross. Finally, the straw came up with a good idea. He laid himself across the brook, and the others were to cross over him. First coal, then bean. Coal took wide steps and slowly crossed the straw, while the bean toddled after. When the coal got to the middle of the straw, however, straw began to burn, and burned through and through. Coal fell fizzling into the water and died. Straw broke in two pieces and flowed away. Bean, who was somewhat behind, slipped and fell into the water, but managed to help herself a little by swimming. Finally, Bean had to drink so much water that she burst and was driven to shore in this condition. Fortunately, a tailor was sitting there. He was resting while taking a hike in the woods. Since he had a needle and thread in his sack, he sewed Bean together. And ever since then, all beans have a seam. According to another story, Bean was the first one to make it across the straw. She reached the other side safely and looked back at Coal on the other side and how he was crossing. In the middle of the way, the coal burned through straw and fell into the water and fizzled. When Bean saw this, she laughed so hard that she burst. The tailor who was sitting at the shore sewed her up, but only had black thread. This is why all beans have a black seam. The story of the fisherman and his wife. Once upon a time, there was a fisherman who lived with his wife in a piss pot near the sea. Every day the fisherman went out to fish, and all he did was fish and fish. One day he was sitting with his line gazing into the clear water, and all he did was sit and sit. Suddenly his line sank deep down to the bottom, and when he pulled it up, he had a large flounder on the line. And the flounder said to him, "Listen here, fisherman, I beg you, let me live. I'm not a real flounder, but an enchanted prince. So what good would it do you to kill me? I certainly wouldn't taste good. Put me back into the water and let me go."
"Hold on," said the man. "You don't have to waste your words on me. I would have thrown back a talking fish into the water anyway." And then he put the fish back into the clear water, and the flounder swam to the bottom, leaving behind a long streak of blood. Then the fisherman stood up and returned to the piss pot to be with his wife, and told her that he caught a flounder, but since it was an enchanted prince, he had to let him go.
"Didn't you wish for anything?"
asked the wife. No, "Oh," said the husband, "what would I have wished for?"
Ah, said the wife. Don't you think it's awful that we got to live in this piss pot? It stinks and it's disgusting. You should have wished for a little hut. Go back and call him. Tell him you want a little hut. I'm sure he'll give us one.
The husband didn't think that it was the right thing to do, but he went back to the sea anyway. And when he arrived, the sea was green and yellow. And he stood at the shore and said,
"Flounder, flounder in the sea. If you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask nonetheless."
The flounder came swimming up to him and said,
"Well, what does she want?" "Oh," said the man, "my wife, Isabel, thinks I should have wished for something because I caught you. Since she doesn't want to live in a piss pot, she'd like to have a hut." "Just go home," said the flounder. "She's already got it."
The fisherman went home, and his wife was standing at the doorway of a hut and said to him,
Come inside, husband, look. Now isn't this much better?
There was a stove and a parlor, also a kitchen. Behind the hut was a little yard and a garden with all kinds of vegetables and chickens and ducks. "Oh," said the fisherman, "now we can enjoy ourselves."
Yes, said the wife, we're going to enjoy it.
Everything went well for about a week or two, and then the wife said,
Listen, husband, the hut is much too cramped, and the yard and the garden are too little. I want a large stone castle. Go back to the flounder and tell him to give us a castle.
"Ah, wife," said the husband, "the flounder has just given us a hut, and I don't want to go back again so soon. The flounder might be unwilling to do anything."
What do you mean? Said the wife. He can easily do it, and he'll be glad to do it. Just go back to him.
So the fisherman left, and his heart grew heavy. When he got to the sea, the water was purple, dark blue, gray, and dense, but still calm. Then he stood there and said,
"Flounder, flounder of the sea, if you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask it nonetheless." "What now? What does she want?" the flounder asked.
"Oh," said the fisherman, somewhat distressed,
"My wife wants to live in a large stone castle."
Go home. She's standing in front of the door,
the flounder said. The fisherman went home, and his wife was standing in front of a large palace.
So, husband, she said, isn't it beautiful?
He went inside with her, and there were many servants, and the walls were all bright. The chairs and the tables were made of gold. Behind the palace was a huge yard, and a park half a mile long with deers and does and rabbits. There was also a stable for cows and horses. "Oh," said the husband, "now let's live in this beautiful castle and be content."
We'll have to think about that,
said the wife,
and sleep on it.
And they went to bed. The next morning the wife woke up. It was just daybreak, and she poked her husband in his side with her elbow and said,
Husband, get up. We must be king and rule this entire country.
"Ah, wife," said the husband, "why should we be king? I don't want to be king."
Well,
said the wife,
then I'll be king.
"Oh, wife," said the husband, "where can you be king? The flounder won't make you a king."
Husband, said the wife, go straight to him and tell him that I must be king.
The fisherman went, but was very distressed that his wife wanted to be king. When he got to the sea, it was completely gray and black, and the water was fermenting from below. The fisherman stood there and said,
"Flounder, flounder in the sea, if you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask it nonetheless. Well, what does she want? The flounder asked. Oh, said the man, she wants to be king.
Go back home, said the flounder. She's already king.
Then the man went home, and as he approached the palace, he saw there were many soldiers, drums, and trumpets. His wife was sitting on a high throne of gold and diamonds, and she wore a large golden crown. 2 rows of ladies in waiting were standing on either side of her, each lady a head shorter than the next. Oh, said the fisherman. Now you're king, aren't you?
Yes,
said his wife.
I am king.
After he gazed at her for some time, he said, Oh, wife, it's wonderful that you're king. Now let's not wish for anything more.
No, husband,
the wife said, as she became restless.
I have too much time on my hands, and I can't stand it anymore. I am king, but now I also want to be emperor.
Oh, wife, said the fisherman, why do you want to be emperor?
Husband, she said, go to the flounder. I want to be emperor.
Oh, wife, the husband said, he can't make you emperor. I don't want to tell that to the flounder.
I am king, she said, and you are just my husband. Go there at once.
The fisherman went away, but as he was walking he thought, this won't turn out well. It's outrageous for her to be emperor. The flounder is going to become sick and tired of this in the end. When he got to the sea, it was all black and dense, and a strong wind whipped across the surface and made the water curdle. Then the fisherman stepped forward and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, if you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask it nonetheless.
Well, what does she want?
asked the flounder. Oh, flounder, he said, my wife wants to be emperor.
Go back home, said the flounder. She's already emperor.
Then the man went home, and when he arrived he saw his wife sitting on a very high throne made from a single piece of gold. She was wearing a large crown 3 yards tall, covered in diamonds and garnets. She was flanked on either side by 2 rows of bodyguard, each man shorter than the next, beginning with a tremendous giant 2 miles tall, and ending with the tiniest dwarf, who was no bigger than my pinky. There were also many princesses and dukes standing before her, and her husband stepped up and said, Wife, now you're emperor, aren't you?
Yes,
she said.
I am emperor.
Oh, said the fisherman, and he gazed at her for some time. It's wonderful that you're emperor.
Husband, she replied, why are you standing there like that? I am the emperor, but now I also want to be pope.
Oh, wife, said the husband, why do you want to be pope?
Husband, she said, I want to be pope.
No, wife, said the fisherman, the flounder can't make you pope. It won't turn out well.
Stop talking nonsense, husband, said the wife. If he can make me emperor, he can also make me pope. Go there at once.
So the fisherman went off, but he felt rather queasy. He was trembling, and his knees began to wobble. A strong wind swept across the land. The water rose up in waves, and the waves splashed against the shore. Ships were in distress as they were tossed up and down by the waves. Though there was still a little blue in the middle of the sky, the horizon was completely red, as if thunderstorms were coming. And then he stepped forward and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, if you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask it nonetheless.
Well, what does she want?
The flounder asked. "Oh," the man said, "she wants to be Pope."
"Go back home," said the flounder. "She's already Pope."
Then the man went home, and when he arrived, his wife was sitting on a throne 2 miles high and wearing 3 large golden crowns on her head. Numerous bishops and priests were standing round her, and there were 2 rows of candles on either side. The biggest candle was as thick and large as the highest tower, and the tiniest was a church candle. "Wife," the man said as he took a good look at her, "are you Pope?"
"Yes," she said, "I am Pope."
"Oh, wife," he said, "isn't it wonderful that you're Pope? You must be satisfied. Now that you're Pope, you can't become anything greater."
"I'll think about it,"
said the wife. Then they both went to bed, but she wasn't satisfied, and her ambition prevented her from sleeping. She kept thinking of ways she might become greater than what she was. When the sun began to rise, she sat at the window and thought,
I could also make the sun rise."
Then she became quite grim and poked her husband and said,
"Husband, go to the flounder. I want to be like God."
The husband was still half asleep, but he was so shocked by what she had asked that he fell out of bed. Wife, be content and remain Pope."
"No," said his wife. "I won't have any peace of mind, and I won't be able to bear it until I can make the sun and the moon rise. I want to be like God."
Wife, the husband said, "the flounder can't do that. He can make you emperor and pope, but he can't make you God."
"Husband," she said and looked ghastly, "I want to be like God. I want you to go to the flounder at once."
Now his limbs began to tremble. He was filled with fear. Outside, a great storm was raging, so much that all the trees and the mountains were shaking. The sky was pitch black. There was thunder and lightning. Black waves rose up in the sea as high as mountains, and they all had crests of white foam on top. Then the fisherman said, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, if you're a man, then speak to me. Though I don't agree with my wife's request, I've come to ask it nonetheless."
"Well, what does she want?"
the flounder asked. "Oh," he said, "she wants to be like God."
"Go back home. She's sitting in your piss pot again."
And that's where they're still sitting, this very day. The story about a brave tailor. Once, in the little city of Romandia, a tailor was sitting and working, and he had an apple lying nearby. There were also many flies around the apple, as was usual during the summertime. The tailor became angry, and he took a piece of cloth. Then he hit the flies on the apple and killed 7 of them. When the simple-minded tailor saw this, he thought he had taken care of the situation quite well, and soon he had a beautiful suit of armor made for himself, and also had golden letters inscribed that read 7 with 1 stroke. Then, dressed in his armor, he went onto the street, and whoever saw him believed that he had killed 7 men with 1 stroke. After that, everyone was terrified of him. Now, in the same region, there was a king whose praise resounded far and wide, and the lazy tailor made his way to the king's court, lay down on the grass and slept. The royal servants, who went in and out of the castle, saw the tailor in the splendid suit of armor and read the inscription. They were very puzzled about what this warrior was doing in the king's courtyard during a time of peace. They thought he was undoubtedly a great lord. The king's counselors, who had also seen the tailor, informed His Majesty that this man could be useful whenever there might be a conflict. The king was very satisfied with their advice and soon summoned the well-armed tailor and asked him whether he wanted to enter his royal service. The tailor answered right away and told His Majesty the King that this is why he had come and asked him to tell him where he might be of use to the king. The king immediately accepted him into his service and gave him special lodgings. Now, it didn't take long for the knights to show the good tailor their ill will. They wished the devil would cart him away, but they were afraid that if they had differences, they wouldn't be able to stand up to him because he had killed 7 with one stroke. So they continually thought of ways to get rid of the warrior. Finally, they discussed the situation with one another and agreed that they would all go to the king and ask to be released from his service. And the king granted their wish. The king was sad to lose all his knights on account of one man, and he wished he'd never laid eyes on him. Indeed, he actually wanted to get rid of him, but he did not dare discharge him for fear that the tailor might kill him and all his people and take over his realm. The king pondered the situation for a long time, going back and forth in his mind, until he hit upon a plan. Since he needed such a strong and powerful warrior, he summoned the tailor and offered him the following proposal. There were 2 giants living in a forest in the king's country, and they were causing great damage by robbing, murdering, and burning people. Nobody could get near them because they tore everyone who approached apart. Neither weapons nor anything else helped. However, if the tailor could conquer these 2 giants and kill them, the king promised him that he would receive the king's only daughter for his wife and half the kingdom as a dowry. Moreover, 100 knights were to accompany him and lend him assistance. The tailor felt good about this proposal, especially since he would become the king's son-in-law, and he replied that he would like very much to kill the giants, but he didn't need the help of the knights, for he knew quite well how to kill the giants. Then he went to the forest, and after he left the knights at the edge of the wood, he entered and began looking to see if he could find the giants in the distance. After he searched for a long time, he found them sleeping and snoring beneath a tree. The tailor didn't have to think long about what to do. He quickly filled his shirt with stones and climbed up to a tree under which they were sleeping. He then threw one stone after another on the chest of one of the giants until he woke up. The giant became angry with his companion and asked why he was hitting him. The other giant excused himself the best he could. Then they lay down to sleep again. And then the tailor threw the stone at the other giant. He too became angry and asked why his companion was throwing stones at him. They quarreled for a while, but since they were tired, they let it pass and closed their eyes again. Then the tailor threw stones at the first giant again with all his might, and the giant couldn't tolerate his companion doing this anymore. So he hit him violently because he thought that it was his companion who had struck him. Well, the other giant didn't like that one bit and stood up. They both became so furious that they ripped trees from the ground and began beating each other to death. Fortunately, they didn't tear up the tree the tailor was sitting in. When he saw what happened, he summoned his courage, which he normally didn't have, and climbed cheerfully down the tree. Then he stabbed the giants with his sword a few times to create wounds and left the forest to meet the knights, who asked him whether he had seen the giants. "Yes," he said, "I've slaughtered the 2 of them and left them lying beneath the tree." The knights doubted very much that he could come away from the giants without being wounded, so they rode into the forest to inspect this miracle and found everything just as the tailor had said. While they felt astonished, they also felt great horror. Indeed, they felt worse than ever. They feared that he might kill them all if he suspected that they were his enemy. So they rode home and told the king about the tailor's deed. Now the tailor wished to have the king's daughter along with half the realm. But when the king saw that he had killed the giants, he regretted that he had promised his daughter in marriage to the unknown warrior and began thinking of a way to break his promise, for he had no intention of giving his daughter to him. So he said to the tailor that there was a unicorn in the forest that caused great damage by harming fish and people. And if the tailor captured the unicorn, the king would give him his daughter. The tailor was satisfied with this proposal, so he took some rope and went to the forest and ordered his escort to remain outside. He wanted to enter alone, and as soon as he went into the forest, he saw the unicorn charging at him and intent on killing him. However, the tailor was nimble, and he waited until the unicorn was very close before jumping behind a nearby tree. Meanwhile, the unicorn was running at full speed and could not turn, so that it thrust its horn into the tree so hard that it became stuck. When the tailor saw this, he went to the unicorn, put the rope around its neck, and tied it to a tree. Then he left the forest and announced his victory over the unicorn. Once the king learned of the tailor's triumph, he became tremendously sad and didn't know what to do, for the tailor continued to desire his daughter. So once again the king demanded he perform a task: capture a wild boar that was running around the forest, and if he succeeded, the king would immediately give him his daughter. The king's huntsmen were to lend him a hand. So the tailor went off to the forest with the huntsmen, but he ordered them to stay outside. And they were pleased, for the wild boar had already given them such rough treatment that they had no desire to chase it. And they thanked the tailor very much. Once the tailor entered the forest, the boar charged at him, foaming from the mouth and gnashing its teeth, and sought to trample him to the ground. Fortunately, there was a chapel in the forest where people often rested, and it was nearby. When the tailor saw it, he ran inside and jumped right out again through one of the windows. The boar followed him inside, while the tailor ran around to the outside, slammed the door shut, and locked the boar inside the little church. Then he went and announced to the huntsman that he had captured the boar. In turn, they rode to the king and informed him of the tailor's deed. It's not clear whether the king liked it or not, and that doesn't matter. He had to give his daughter to the tailor. However, I'm certain that if he had known that the hero was actually a tailor, he would have put a noose around his head instead of giving his daughter to him. As it was, the king had to give his daughter to a stranger, but with grave concern. Thereafter, the tailor didn't ask much, but just thought about becoming the king's son-in-law. So the wedding took place with little joy, and a king was made out of a tailor. After he spent some nights lying next to his bride, the tailor began talking in his sleep and said, "Boy, finish that jerkin and mend the trousers fast, or else I'll give you a whack on your head with my yardstick." While his wife happened to hear all of this, she went to his father to complain. She begged him to help him get rid of her husband, who was nothing but a tailor. The king was cut to heart when he heard that he had given his only daughter to a tailor. So he consoled her the best he could and told her to leave the door of her bedroom open that night. Then he would post some servants outside, and when the tailor began to talk, they would go inside and do away with him. The king's daughter was content with this plan. However, the king had a weapon bearer at his court who was kindly disposed to the tailor and had overheard everything. So he went quickly to the young king and informed him about the plot against him and advised him to protect himself as best he could. The tailor was very grateful and assured his friend that he knew how to take care of this matter. When the night arrived, the tailor went to bed with his young queen and pretended to fall asleep. Then she secretly got out of bed, went to the door and opened it, and then got back into bed. As soon as the tailor heard this, he began to talk loudly, as if he was talking asleep, and so loudly that the servants outside could hear him.
Boy, finish the jerkin and mend those trousers fast, or else I'll give you a whack on the head with my yardstick. I've slain 7 with 1 stroke, killed 2 giants, captured a unicorn, and trapped a wild boar. Do you think I'm afraid of those fellows waiting outside my door?
When the men heard the tailor's words, they fled as if the wild host of hell were after them, and nobody wanted to do anything to him after this. Thus, the tailor remained king for the rest of his life. Good night, my friends. May the dark side watch over you. Sleep tight, and don't let the Jedi bite.